Hello, Golden Eagles, and welcome to The Perch. I'm your host, Zach Goff, and today we're interviewing the Scholastic-Bowl head coach, Mr. Johnson. As always, please remember to like and subscribe if you want to know more about the ins and outs of Stanton River High School and what makes the school tick. Mr. Johnson, how do you define your role as a Scholastic-Bowl coach beyond preparing students for matches?
So I think when you're looking at preparing students beyond these matches, yeah, it's good to think about the knowledge that you have here, but a lot of it's book knowledge, I get that. But a bigger aspect of Scholastic-Bowl is working as a team. So there's a team of 4, and they have to rely on one another. That one student knows a lot about history. The other student knows a lot about English. They have to trust one another to say, hey, I got this question, you got this question, and they have to trust one another to do that. So there's a lot of trust there. Another sense is simply the idea of diligence, that learning these questions and learning the stuff about this takes time and study and diligence. And so teaching these students this diligence and this idea behind that is helpful. And for those of you who aren't super familiar with Scholastic-Bowl, what it is you're basically academic trivia. You have 2 teams, let's say Northside and Stanton River, or XYZ team. And we would play them against trivia. That's questions about things that you would get in school. So like your math, your science, and sometimes they throw in some pop culture things in there. But mostly it's about this academic trivia. That's things that they should see in school anyways. And so it is school focused, but it also allows students to kind of bond together and work kind of like as a trivia team, trying to compete against another school and try to beat them in trivia. So that's kind of what it is.
So it's kind of like a competitive trivia, more or
Yes,
less?
very much so. In terms of competition, it depends on who you play, right? As with any team, there are some teams that are better, some teams that are worse. And so it is definitely competitive. And so we do like practice. We look at questions. We look at questioning types. And practices aren't always sit, read questions, answer questions. Those are some practices, but there are also practices where we write questions. So what would a question look like to be written by us? There are other times where we might, instead of just writing questions, we might try to say, oh, well, what if we actually just take some time and look at what you're learning in your classes? They say, oh my gosh, this is what I learned today, and this showed up in the question. Exactly. So there's some other ways that there are practice can be run. It doesn't just have to be sit down, read questions. Other times, there might be times for writing questions and other things like that.
So a lot of the, or not a lot of times, but sometimes the questions that students get can flow directly from lessons that they learned previously in the day.
The amount of times I hear in the season, oh, we just learned this yesterday, happens a lot. Another thing that I would say is pretty prevalent is that students will oftentimes see a question that maybe we heard in a match. And I'll say, hey, write that down. If you didn't know it, learn about it. Maybe 4 or 5 matches later, a question very similarly worded to that will show up again. They're like, wait, I know this one. Because I had it before, I wrote down that answer, I learned about the topic, and now I know that topic. We like to think that there's a lot of topics in the world, but there are certain things that people like knowing about, and there are certain things that schools tend to teach, right? We can't teach everything in the world because there's a lot to know about the world, but there's certain things that show up more frequently, right? If you're talking about English as an English teacher, like Dante and his Inferno will show up more frequently than if we were talking about some very obscure Italian poet. Just realistically, there's only so much time in the day to learn about everything.
What drew you to advising Scholastic-Bowl and what keeps you invested year after year?
So when I first started this, I actually started as a reader. So I wasn't actually started coaching. I started just reading, and I just went to a match and read for a match. And I thought, this is a lot of fun. This is cool. Stuart Gibbs was the coach here at the time, and I read for him and helped him out. Then probably, I think that next year I was getting ready to read. I don't think they needed me that year. And then COVID happened. A lot of things changed up. Some people left, some people stayed, and they didn't have a coach. And I said, hey, look, I loved reading. It was a great time. I'd love to be the coach. And they said, there ain't nobody else. Go ahead and take it. And so I started it from there. And then from there, we actually just had to rebuild a lot because that was true of almost every team after COVID. We had 3 people during COVID, and there was a grand old time. We did what we could. It was all virtual. What was crazy is during COVID, no teams could meet because of all the requirements and tracking and those sorts of things. So you couldn't have another team play another team because all of the cross-contamination. But with Quiz Bowl, you're asking questions. You don't need to physically compete. So if you don't need to physically compete, give me 1 second. If you don't need to physically compete, suddenly you have an option of, well, what if we just do it virtually? So we set up virtual matches. We set up Zoom rooms. We set up a moderator who would, read to both rooms, not in the same room. And we ran matches, and we actually had a season that year. And so, oftentimes I would be getting help that season. And I said, wow, I really appreciate all the time that you're, giving to this. I know I'm a new coach and stuff. He said, no, you're it. I said, what do you mean? He said, you are the only sport active at State and River right now, because no other sport could do anything because of COVID restrictions. So we were the only VHSL sport happening in the entire State and River. So it was a little nerve-wracking, and we went 0-10. It was not great. My first year coaching, we only had 3 people. It was a big rebuilding year. We went 0-10. And it just took time. We brought new people in. I had some people who seemed interested. I talked to people in my classes. I talked to some of the English classes just because everybody takes English. I tried recruiting. I talked to people. And ultimately, I found students like finding like-minded students. So I found students oftentimes find students who are pretty good at what they're doing. And we just started building the program slowly but surely. And now we're at this year where so far we are 8-0 instead of 0-10. So it's been a great change from what we have. And some years you have really tough teams. Some years you don't. That's just the part of sports that normally goes. So that's kind of what started it. And what keeps me invested is just working with these students. I also coach marching band, and working with students outside of a class setting is really rewarding.
How do you balance being a coach, mentor, and educator within this activity?
It's tough. A lot of times being a coach, you have to think, okay, you kind of have to change your mindset, right? You finish teaching, you say, all right, got to turn on coach mindset and start thinking about this as a coach and less of a teacher. They occasionally overlap because, again, it's academic trivia. So sometimes they'll ask me an English question and I say, hey, I know this. But I also realize that I'm not the best trivia person out there. There are people way better than me. But something that one of our old athletic directors mentioned, Coach Smallwood mentioned, was it's not so much about being the best that you can be at XYZ activity. It's about equipping people to be the best at that activity. So I don't need to be the best trivia master out there. I need to be able to equip the people I'm coaching to be the best trivia people out there. So it's more about me teaching them and giving them, equipping them so that they can be successful. Because I can't do anything once it starts. Once that match starts, I can sub people in occasionally, but I really can't say, hey, you need to do this. I'm actually not really allowed to talk during the match. It's all about me equipping the students and helping them succeed.
In what ways have you seen students grow academically or personally through Scholastic-Bowl?
In terms of academics, a lot of these students are already fairly academically successful. Not always, but oftentimes. In terms of personal growth, a lot of times it's nice to see, and this is true of any team, to see students start from the bottom, right? 8th grade, 9th grade. They know some, but they've never done this before, and they have no idea what they're doing. And then by their senior year, they're actually helping the new ones coming along, saying, oh, this is what you need to expect. Oh, look out for this, this might happen. And seeing students be able to give that to other students is really rewarding. So I would say that that helps in terms of just them learning to help other people who are younger than themselves, right? They're not just saying, oh, it's just about me. They're trying to equip others to then also take their place and see that this is something that continues. It's a legacy. It's not simply, oh, it's all about me.
How do you help students build confidence, especially those who may be hesitant to speak up at first?
It depends. So that is a serious issue. So a lot of times we have something that looks like a buzzer, right, that you're trying to buzz in. And when you're trying to think about buzzing, there's like this idea of buzzer anxiety. If you answer early on and you get it wrong, you actually lose points for your team. And so some people are like, I don't want to lose points for my team. I don't want to let them down. And that's a real concern, right? Because most sports, you can't lose points, right? You can just not get the point. You don't get the touchdown. You don't get the basket. But losing points is like, oh, no, I lost points for my team, right? So buzzer anxiety is a real thing. How do you get over that? Practice is one. And two, giving students a chance to buzz in without penalty at times, right? So in practices, real games, yes, you buzz in early, you get a penalty. But in practice, I might say, hey, look, I just want you to buzz in. And if you buzz in, you're getting a point, period. Like, oh, so I'm not going to lose points no matter what. Right. So that encourages students to get used to buzzing, to get used to working with the team. Also, having other students around them that buzz in helps that a little bit. And then going to tournaments. The more tournaments, the more practices and games you play, the more confident you get. And so oftentimes I try to register our teams for at least 2 tournaments. A tournament, typically you play through like 100 questions. So like this would be a packet of like 200 questions. So 10 sets, 20 questions. There's 200 questions with 3 like subparts. So really it's like 500 questions. It's a long day. It's a really long day for them. But these sorts of questions allow students to get confidence, to practice outside of just a regular season where they might only hear half that amount. Also because I can register more teams in a tournament, instead of just putting my best team forward, I can put 3 teams forward. Then everybody gets experience where they're, instead of here's my best 4, when I have a team of 14, I can put all 14 out there and try to do their best.
What skills do students develop here that aren't always visible on a scoreboard?
This kind of gets into this idea of what am I encouraging with the leaders? What am I trying to bring about in them? Looking for 5 things. I start with dedication and diligence. If you're dedicated to this thing, you want to show up every day, you want to try to learn more, that is step 1. If you're diligent, you're going into the small things and saying, oh, I missed this one part, I need to learn about that. That diligence and that dedication show up everywhere, right? That shows up in a job. If you are showing up every day, you're making sure you're there doing the best you can, and then you're taking the time to the little things in a job, that will show growth. And that's the third step, is growth. Put those 2 together, bring those every day, you're going to improve. That is almost a guarantee. With growth then comes leadership. As you grow, as you get better at these things, people start to look to you for a leader. They say, wow, this kid's showing up every day and he's like really taking the time on this. What is different about this person? And they start looking to you as a leader. And that could even just be in a class. So that leadership aspect then becomes, okay, well, how do I steward this well? How do I keep doing what I'm doing? And then lastly, as that time goes on, responsibility increases. So you might start off with, okay, I'm not bad. You're somewhat responsible for your part. But as you get better, as you grow, people start looking to you. You start becoming more responsible for the team. And so that responsibility increases as your growth increases. So the 2 foundations I would say is dedication and diligence.
And that concludes this episode of The Perch.